In modern political discourse, corporation is almost a slur. In 2021, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, responding to criticisms of his tax proposal, released a video titled, "Yeah, we're gonna tax billionaires and corporations," in which he assures us that the new taxes would be taken exclusively from large corporations and their wealthy owners. He says this as though, even if true, it would automatically make the taxes okay. He seems to be implying that corporate income is so obviously unjustified that we needn't have any qualms with just taking it. On the other side, in opposition to a different tax hike proposal, Senator Rand Paul was quick to point out that it would hurt small businesses. Why, small businesses specifically? Aren't large corporations just as entitled to keep what they have earned? Perhaps Paul's intention was simply to focus on the victims that he thinks people will have sympathy for, but either way, both he and Sanders, and most other politicians, arrange their rhetoric around the broadly held view that large corporations are fundamentally corrupt organizations, flooded with riches they neither earned nor deserved to keep. This view is completely unwarranted. Far from being hoarders of ill-gotten gains, large corporations are an incalculable boon for humanity. If anything, they deserve to keep more of what they earn, not less. From the standpoint of basic economics, the beneficence of large corporations is obvious. Trade is mutually beneficial. Corporations engage in an enormous amount of trade with an enormous number of people. Therefore, corporations provide an enormous amount of benefit to an enormous number of people. When you buy a burger from McDonald's, you must value the burger more than the money, or you would not have bought it. The owners and employees of McDonald's must value the money they're receiving more than the burger, or they would not have sold it. Therefore, everyone values what he has after the trade more highly than he valued what he had before the trade. That is, total wealth has increased. But couldn't the employees produce that same burger for you without that giant corporate structure? Simply put, no. Consider the employees at your local McDonald's restaurant. If it's anything like other locations, then the staff there are probably somewhat young and or inexperienced. McDonald's tends to be a good starter job for a lot of people. So if those same people, instead of working at McDonald's, were to go start their own burger joint, how well do you think it would do? Would you go there? You probably wouldn't. Successful corporations like McDonald's tend to become successful by providing both capital and management structure. This allows products to be produced at a lower cost, a higher quality, and at a consistency that more than makes up for the cost of running that structure. The employees, just like the consumers, must be getting more out of engaging with the corporation than they could get elsewhere. Otherwise, they would not have engaged. Once again, after the exchange, total wealth has increased. Essentially, it's like this. The more wealthy a corporation is, the more wealth it must have produced for others in exchange. This argument alone will probably not convince a skeptic. The heavy critics of large corporations tend to have arguments that they think rebut or outweigh the simple economic argument that I've provided. Perhaps the problem with the simple economic argument is that it assumes a free market, which is not entirely what we live in. Some of the wealth of large corporations comes from subsidies, government handouts. Conservatives, progressives, and libertarians all love to rail against corporate welfare. And not without some justification. Corporations really do receive subsidies, and subsidy income really cannot be justified by our simple economic argument. After all, taxing someone and giving that money to a corporation is not a voluntary exchange, and therefore we cannot assume that it results in total increased wealth for both parties. In fact, we should probably expect that it doesn't. Empirically, however, the vast majority of corporate wealth does not come from subsidies. The 5 largest US corporations by market cap are Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Tesla. Last year, Apple's revenue was $366 billion, Microsoft's was $168 billion, Google's was $258 billion, Amazon's was $470 billion, and Tesla's was $54 billion. The obvious way to get an idea of how much of that revenue is due to government handouts would be to compare their 2021 revenue to their 2021 subsidies. However, according to the subsidy tracker on Good Jobs First, not all of these corporations received subsidies in 2021, so we'll need to take a longer view. Totaling the disclosed subsidies for 2011 to 2021, Apple got 1.4 billion, Microsoft got 670 million, Google got 405 million, Amazon and Tesla each got 3.6 billion. Simple division reveals that for most of these corporations, an entire decade's worth of subsidies was still less than a few days' worth of their revenue. Even the relatively well-subsidized Tesla earns more every few weeks by selling cars than it received in subsidies in those 10 years combined. In fact, this still massively overstates the corporate welfare rebuttal to the simple economic argument. Why? Because a lot of those subsidies were in fact tax breaks. A subsidy, a real subsidy, is a source of income that the corporation needn't produce anything for anyone in order to receive. On the other hand, a tax break is simply that corporation being allowed to keep more of the profits that incentivize the production in the first place. To be clear, every government subsidy is worth opposing if we want to care about free markets, and I do. All that I'm saying is that on net, the amount of income they receive from government subsidies is just negligible compared to the income they receive providing goods and services for you to enjoy. Yes, there is some subsidization of corporations, and there's some subsidization of everyone in society. Everyone uses some government service at some point, whether he wants to or not. The question is simply, is the corporate bailout or corporate welfare argument a significant rebuttal to the simple economic argument that trade is mutually beneficial and corporations receive their money through trade? The answer is just no. No, it is not. Another common refrain is that corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes. Pew Research found that 81% of Americans are bothered, at least some, by their perception that some corporations don't pay their fair share. Looking at the numbers, this might initially seem valid. In 2021, corporate income tax accounted for 9% of all federal tax revenue, as opposed to 51% from individual income taxes. However, there are two issues with this picture. First, corporations are made up of people. Everyone from the entry-level employees to the board of directors are paying income tax on the income they receive from the company. That means that corporate taxes are really paid by everyone involved with the corporation on top of the money that they are already paying for their normal income tax. Some argue that the wealthy owners of corporations tend to avoid taxes themselves, but this is just simply false. A Heritage Foundation investigation found that the US tax system is already highly progressive, with the top 5% paying 60% of the taxes despite earning only 37% of the income. The other issue is that it's unclear how corporations paying taxes is a good thing in the first place. Corporations survive on their ability to allocate resources better than competitors. Governments have no such requirement. Take schools, for example. If a private school provides a bad service, I can take my child out of that school and it will no longer receive my money. On the other hand, if a government school provides a bad service, even if I take my child out of the school, they still get my money through taxation. Therefore, they do not have the same incentive to provide a good service. This same logic applies to all government services. Therefore, corporate taxation is the transfer of resources from an organization with good incentives to use them responsibly to an organization with poor incentives to do so. Corporations make for pretty juicy political targets. They are organizations of humans rather than individuals, and so it's pretty easy to dehumanize them in your rhetoric. The largest of them are, by definition, pretty wealthy, and so many will find them hard to feel sorry for, and everyone has a good reason to want to demonize them so that they can plunder them. But upon reflection, it's hard to find a more socially beneficial class of organizations anywhere. Rather than being seen as acceptable targets of hatred and sources of guilt-free plunder, large corporations should be seen as inspiring achievements for human welfare, and their creators should be admired as the heroes of civilization that they are.